Okay, so thank you very much for attending this talk, and obviously thank you for the organizers of the Devroom for accepting the proposal. So well, that's my name. I'm coming from OpenNebula Systems. My idea today, I'm coming here not as a competitor of OpenStack. I'm coming here to talk to you about the work we're doing at the European level, along with other European companies, to align the geo-strategic interest of the European Union with what we are actually doing at the open source sector in Europe. So that's my email, and you want to just follow up with any questions after the session today. As I mentioned, apart from being at the part of OpenNebula Systems, I'm also part of the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud, which is an initiative I'll explain later today, or later now, run by the European Commission, and also part of another initiative we call Sovereign Edge, which I always explain. I mean, I'll explain also in a few minutes' time. Okay, so just to bring you some ideas, I'm sure most of you are already familiar with some of the concepts and the strategy, let's say, behind what we're doing right now at the European level. We've mentioned before, and you're perfectly aware of the fact that the cloud market in Europe is, I wouldn't say broken, but it's not balanced, at least, let's say. So these are just some figures of the growth of the cloud market in Europe in recent years, and how the share of European cloud providers has evolved over time. So what we basically see is that the market is growing enormously, but the share of the European cloud providers is actually declining. So that all that business and all that value is being generated by also part of also through the pandemic to cloud computing, that is mostly benefiting hyperscalers. So also you're perfectly aware of this. So we are now witnessing this kind of change of paradigm. So we're moving away from the kind of cloud centralized model to a more decentralized approach. This shift of paradigm between cloud computing and edge computing, that most of you, I'm sure you're aware of. And we all know it comes with a number of benefits. We're talking about deployment of applications, ultra low latency applications, improving user experience. Think about sectors like online gaming or healthcare. I mean, there are a number of functional advantages to this, but from a European perspective, there's also a key element in moving away from cloud computing, a centralized cloud computing model dominated by hyperscalers, to a decentralized edge computing model in which other companies have a say. And that is to also foster here in Europe a new ecosystem of infrastructure providers that can bring some balance to that market. So we are assuming that the cloud market is dominated by hyperscalers, non-EU companies. That's honestly, that's unlikely to change. What we can do is leverage this shift, this new paradigm of edge computing, where we know there are going to be a number of demands for this new infrastructure that doesn't exist yet, or this technology that doesn't exist yet, to bring some balance to that market and allow smaller companies in Europe, for instance, to build their own infrastructure offering, bring that to the public with these new platforms, new technologies, hopefully based on open source, as I will explain in a second, and bring some balance to a market that's now heavily unbalanced. And to the point that we all agree, and also the Commission, that we call it a market failure. So it is so complicated, so unbalanced, that now it's very difficult for a new company to get into this market and actually survive against these big players. Okay, this is especially relevant in Europe because we have a powerful tool here, which is the telecom sector. As I'll explain in a second, many of the initiatives that are taking place now in Europe, they rely or they hope that the telecom sector in Europe will come together and will help to build this alternative edge infrastructure that will be able to bring and offer an alternative to hyperscalers. We need to get the telcos involved, and that also means we have to fight sometimes from the open source perspective, but in general, for this new change of paradigm, we have to fight against the temptation in some companies in Europe to align their priorities or get some agreements with hyperscalers to speed up the deployment of edge infrastructure in the market. But we all agree that this might come with some risks in the midterm. I think we all agree on that. I'm going to be explaining today what we are doing at the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud, and other initiatives that we're moving and promoting from the European open source sector. The main challenge here, if you think about what the future is going to be, or what kind of challenges we're going to have in the near future, I mean, there are many technical challenges and political challenges as well. A basic one, which we still don't have an answer for that, is how we're going to manage if by the end of the decade we actually have tens of thousands of edge nodes across the continent. How on earth we're going to manage all that infrastructure? How are we going to manage thousands of edge nodes with different architectures from different brands, from all of those managed by hundreds, potentially hundreds of different infrastructure providers? That's the whole idea. So how we bring all this new emerging infrastructure together, how we build the tools for a user, for a customer to actually leverage all this new infrastructure that's still to come, and how to make that in a way that doesn't bring us again to a new scenario of vendor locking. So how can we make sure that all these workloads can move freely from one place to another? How we automate all these deployments? How to make this really easy for people to actually use this thousands of edge nodes that will be available in the market here in Europe, hopefully in a few years' time. So that's a very specific technical challenge that we'll have to solve right now, and we have to decide how we fix that, and whether we want to fix that as Europeans, or we want to, again, rely on non-European organizations and companies to do this for us, which is very comfortable, but then at some point we realize we don't have the skills in Europe to take over these projects if something happens. So I talk about the alignment. So there is a gradual alignment, and sometimes quite explicit from what the signals we get from the Commission in this case, and what the industry as a whole in Europe is doing, but specifically the European open source technology providers. So there are some very clear declarations from top EU figures about the need to achieve this kind of technological sovereignty in some way or another, trying to coexist with hyperscalers, but hopefully creating some alternative scenario for Europe. Happily, there are also quite explicit declarations on the role that open source is expected to play in all this, and there is a commitment to do this, and I'm happy to say that the discussions we have within the Alliance to define these technology priorities and these co-investment priorities, they are quite well aligned with the fact that these technologies have to be open source, and open source is the way to mobilize this collaboration between different companies in Europe. Obviously, that doesn't mean proprietary software is not going to be there, because it has to be there, and it's the base of some business models out there. But open source is going to play a key role in all this. Again, we see this aligned with what we've read from the Commission through a number of documents that I'm sure you're familiar with, and also with declarations from people like Commissioner Thierry-Breton. As I mentioned before, one of the practical challenges, if we believe what the digital decade strategy says, we'll have, by the end of this decade, thousands of edge nodes across Europe. How are we going to manage this infrastructure? What's the technology that's going to allow new infrastructure providers to offer this to their customers? So that technology doesn't necessarily exist right now. That technology, in any case, we think should be European if we want to extend this concept of sovereignty down to the technology stack, not just leave that at the data level or at the cloud provider level. We see also in the reviewed industrial strategy from the Commission that the role that edge computing is expected to play in this data processing that's moving away gradually, quite rapidly, sometimes from a centralized cloud to the edge, we're going to use that to actually bring some balance to the market. So make sure that European companies have something to say in that, and the model doesn't replicate again the kind of oligopoly structure we have in the cloud market. So that's the role of edge computing, and that's also increasingly the role that open source is perceived or expected to play in bringing different companies together to build this in the long term and maintain the whole thing running. Because obviously we can release things, but we need a long-term commitment from the European industry, not just to consume technologies, but also system integrators as well. Not just to consume technologies and sell them and resell them, but also maintain them in the long term. And that's one of the main challenges we'll have. So the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud, that's one of the steps, one of the initiatives that the Commission has put in place, in which the European industry is playing a leading role here. So it comes back from a declaration from member states, the commitment to support these new technologies, cloud edge technologies. If you read this original declaration, which they committed to spend in all this transformation around 10 billion euros, I don't think we'll get that much, but it's as explained later, there is a quite decent amount of money involved in all this. But we see, even in this declaration, there are already some references to at least something that sounds a bit like open source something, so open source standards, whatever that is. But still, it's good to see it's in there somehow. So the Alliance was born in 2021. There was an initial publication of an industrial technology roadmap from a number of European companies at the CEO level. It was then launched at the end of 2021 by Commissioner Thierry Breton, and I'm happy to say that by the end of February probably we'll be in good condition to publish the updated version of this technology roadmap with all the technology priorities that have been identified and deployment priorities that have been identified in Europe from the industry perspective, but also in alignment with the vision of the European Commission. The Alliance brings companies, private companies, only European companies, member states, and then also a number of experts are involved in this and in these discussions. We had our first physical General Assembly here in Brussels in early December. It was quite successful. The idea is, again, as I mentioned, identify this investment needs, these priorities, how to bring together the expectations and the needs and the potential of the industry in Europe with what the Commission is actually expecting, or their vision of what Europe needs in coming years and these challenges. Right now there are 3 working groups. One of them is for member states. This is mainly people involved in discussions on procurement. So they're looking at how to, from a procurement perspective, help European companies and cloud providers in the daily business with the administration in different countries. The main question we get from them is, should we restrict contracts to only European companies? And it's very tempting to say yes, but personally I always say, well, you take the decision. I mean, I'm just a company. That's something for you to decide. Obviously, that will benefit us, but discussions are more complex. But that's one of the topics that keeps coming up many times. And then there are 2 working groups for industry. One of them is the Cloud Edge working group that we from OpenNebula we chair along with another 2 companies, with Capgemini and SAP. And then there's a specific working group for everything that has to do with cloud for defense and aeronautics sector, which I'm happy to say some of you were earlier this morning in this debate I had with Gael from Eclipse Foundation. It was striking for me personally to see all these people coming from the defense industry saying that they want to use open source. So the debates, the internal debates, is not about proprietary source, open source code or open source. They want to use open source. They just need help to make sure that they can use open source under the very specific restrictions they have in this sector. So I think that's a good news for everyone. So the Alliance, there are not all the logos here because it's an old version, but as you see, some of the main actors in the European industry as a whole, not just technology providers, but people from other sectors as well, contributing to this, cloud providers as well. There was, as I mentioned, the first version of this document released in 2021, and we'll have that released in probably end of February. So one of the ideas is also, for those of you who are familiar with all the different programs that the Commission has in place, things like Horizon Europe or Digital Europe or CEF, to make sure that from industry we feed the Commission with what's actually the challenges and the needs we have in terms of advancing all these technologies for cloud and edge, and to make sure that the new calls and the new actions under these programs are aligned with what we actually from the industry identify. So it's like giving a quick channel to give feedback to the Commission to what these topics could be in terms of helping us also advance that. So that's the structure of the alliance. I'm also here to invite all of you, if you come from a European company and your business is relevant to cloud, and I guess that's why you're here right now. There's an open process to join. It goes through the European Commission. You can join the alliance. You can join the different working groups and participate. Maybe it's a bit now too late for this new version, but there will be new versions and new working groups during the rest of the year, and it's a long-term commitment from these companies to participate in this. So that's from what the European Commission side has to do. In the meantime, more specifically from the open source, from the European open source industry, we've also been working in having some more cooperation and collaboration among ourselves. In 2021, we launched kind of an informal initiative or community, you could call. We call it Sovereign Edge. It's about bringing together European open source technology providers that have they develop some technologies, or we develop some technologies in Europe that are relevant for edge computing and this change of paradigm. And we think it makes sense to get closer to each other and get to know each other a bit better, and integrations and all that, and going together to some of these projects that will be coming up in the near future. So we've started with an informal community of European open source companies. We produce software, and we already have some level of integration among ourselves. The objective is at some point to offer an alternative stack of European open source technologies for public administrations and companies and system integrators. Also with making sure that we have connections with all the European relevant European cloud providers, to offer at least an alternative that goes beyond data and cloud. It also covers the technology that sustains all this. We launched this, as I mentioned, in 2021 informally. At the end of 2021, I'm quite proud of this. We didn't get this money, but I'm quite proud of this because this was the first time the European open source industry came together to apply, submit a Horizon Europe project to the Commission. We didn't get this money, but it was a very nice experience to try to bring people who had never ever considered to get into a research and innovation project, a European project, coming together and preparing this proposal, which, as you know, is a lot of work. Happily, we got it the second time. So this is the Cognic project. It has started now in January. We, from OpenNebula, we coordinate this project with a number of other organizations involved. It's going to be running for 3 years, and I'm happy to say this is the actual implementation of this initial collaboration between European open source providers and the research and innovation ecosystem in Europe to produce some technology together and respond to some of these calls from the Horizon Europe program. And finally, just to finish, a very quick introduction to another initiative that's now ongoing, which is let me see if I get this right, Important Project of Common European Interest for Next Generation Cloud Infrastructure and Services. Okay, so it's IPSAIS for friends. We've been preparing this for, a couple of years or so. This goes through the next generation funding. It's led by Germany and France with heavy support from the Commission. And well, in total, it's 12 member states that are going to mobilize funding from the Commission, from European funding through their national budgets, state aid it's called, to set up this huge project for Cloud Edge Continuum and at different levels. We have, I cannot disclose the companies, the specific companies, but it's European industry, telecommunication companies, software developers coming together, to cloud providers coming together to build a whole stack of the technologies and the advanced services we need for infrastructure, applications and data. So it's really exciting. It will cover a number of challenges that we won't get into the details here, but it will be available on the slides. But yeah, big topics like interoperability, portability, meta orchestration across different providers, avoiding vendor locking, and managing all this huge heterogeneous edge infrastructure that we expect to be in Europe in the coming years. This is going to run, if we pass all the tests and all the questions from DG Competition and the rest of the Commission, it will start hopefully this year, maybe second semester or so. We'll be running for 5 years. And yeah, that's my personal opinion, but I think the components that we're building or will be building in this project, they have the potential to actually become, you'll see when this is published, this is the equivalent to the semiconductor or the hydrogen IPSCI project that are already approved. But I think the open source that we'll be producing here, hopefully will have the potential to become probably the largest open source project in Europe in the coming years. So stay in touch, because we'll need help. And also an invitation for you to follow this new project that we are starting now under the Horizon Europe program. Thank you.